Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to join in the debate tonight on our throne speech delivered last Wednesday, Standing Up for Saskatchewan, delivered by the Lieutenant Governor on behalf of our Premier and our government. Mr. Speaker, as I quite often do, as many members do, I want to recognize some very important people before I get into the brunt of my comments, Mr. Speaker. Of course, first and foremost is family. My wife, Leona, great support through thick and thin. We've been married 32 years now, dated for 5.5 years before that, so she's put up with me for closing in on 4 decades. And we've been blessed with 3 beautiful kids, two of which are our daughters, Caitlin and Rianne. Caitlin just got married this last summer. I think I've talked about her former fiance and their children previously, but now officially married as of June 30th, and we've gained 2 grandchildren there as well. Mr. Speaker, Ray is 16, Sacred Heart High School in Yorkton, and Malaya is 9 years old, goes to elementary school in Yorkton, so great additions to our family. We love them greatly. And of course, my younger daughter Rianne married to Austin, Caitlin married to Mark Cuthill, and my younger daughter Rianne married to Austin Cranbill, and an oil field geologist working a lot in the south, and they blessed us with a couple amazing little grandkids as well. Winslet is 3.5, and little Otto Gregory Cranbill turned 7 months just a few days ago, so just a real blessing and enjoying the Halloween time, and it's great to have those FaceTime pictures and things to be able to enjoy them even when we're here. So again, very supportive family that I'm very thankful for. Great blessings. Of course, all the constituents of Yorkton, Saskatchewan that have sent me here for 11 years, nominated 2 years before that, so I've spent a number of years in this place, and it has been a real honor. Some challenging days, obviously, but again, a very rewarding career, and it's a pleasure that I have of representing them here in this place, this great building. Of course, the staff, as many will give credit to the staff, we can't do this job without them. My staff back in Yorkton, Loretta and Rochelle, that do a great job representing the constituency back there and doing the day-to-day casework. And of course, all the staff in my office here, Braden, my chief of staff, and there's Whitney and Catherine doing casework, and Carter's a new addition to our staff up in the office here, and Anna Marie, our new exec admin up there, Mr. Speaker. So we do have a great team, of course, working closely in conjunction with all the Minister of Health office right next door, working very closely together to do the jobs that we do here every day. So very grateful to have those individuals to work with, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and of course all of the colleagues on this side of the House, and of course the other side of the House, Mr. Speaker, as well. Of course, I'd like the new member for Regina Northeast, congratulate him for his win and entering this place, and of course the members on this side of the House. It's just a pleasure to work with them every day. Our new Premier, I think, is just doing an amazing job. He's been representing us very well in China and throughout the States, and of course he's going to be going to India very shortly to forward our interests, Saskatchewan interests there, that we've got to deal with some of the challenging issues we have with the United States, and some of the challenging issues we have with our federal government, Mr. Speaker. We're not letting that get in the way of representing Saskatchewan and making sure that our interests are well represented nationwide. So again, very thankful for all those supports. So when we start looking at the throne speech, again, Mr. Speaker, standing up for Saskatchewan is something that we're proud to do every day. And of course, I think our Premier set the tone in the leadership run when he was questioned, what are you going to do about the carbon tax? What are you going to do representing our province? And his statement, just watch me, I think was pretty apt a statement. And we've watched him represent this province, this legislature, the people of this province, time and time again in a very strong fashion and a very balanced fashion, representing again our province of Saskatchewan. So we look at some of the key points in our throne speech, Mr. Speaker. One of the first points made is today our economy and provincial finances are showing clear signs of improvement, and they are. We have to be very protective, very cautious, and very protective of where we are. We've seen some challenges over the last number of years, but of course we're focused on keeping our province strong, our economy strong, which in respect, we know that's the way that we're going to maintain a strong economy, finances for the province, which helps us finance those things that are so important to the people of the province. The file that I represent with my fellow Minister of Health, from Rosetown whether it comes to health, social services, advanced education, justice, infrastructure and highways, our new Minister of Highways. I'm blessed to call her my friend and a colleague very nearby. I think she's doing a great job initially off representing our infrastructure investments in highways. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what she's going to do in the future, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So when we look at, again, some of the key things in the throne speech when it comes to financial management, we've talked quite often about our 3-year plan to get back to balance. Of course, we know we had a $1.2 billion deficit a couple of years back. We brought it down to this year, $303 million forecast, and of course, aiming to be at balance next year, which is recognized not only by independent agencies around our province and our country, but around North America, which is the reason that we do have the AAA credit rating that we do have, Mr. Speaker, which does save us ample amounts of money when it comes to finances and recognition not only of that, but also recognition of our province being a very strong place to invest in. We see that we continue to enjoy a very strong investment climate when it comes to industry and business in our province, which again is very important in creating a strong economy and making sure that we have those jobs and those opportunities for people, including our children, to make sure we have them staying in this province. And Mr. Speaker, I think that's reflective of one of the significant numbers that we see when it talks about the strength of our province is our population. Now at 1.162 million people, which we heard from members opposite only a few short years ago before we formed government, us shooting for a 10% growth in population. They called it statistically impossible and something that was, somewhat ludicrous. But it's something that we've been able to, with the strong support and work of our provincial partners, been able to sustain and maintain that to the point now that we have grown by well over that 10% over the last 10 years, Mr. Speaker. So a good strong indication of the growth in our province. Part of that developing that strong economy is focusing on our resource sector. We know we have a strong resource sector, but it's important to keep that resource sector strong.
It now being 10:30 p.m., the time of adjournment, this House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 1:30 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Speakers. We had a bit of a late evening last night. I finished off about 10:30, so I'll just wind up my comments this afternoon, hopefully as briefly as possible. I want to just confirm again my recognition of my family, my constituents, my staff both here and in Yorkton for the hard work that they do and the support that they do give me, that I'm able to do the job that I am here in Regina, Mr. Speaker. But of course we're here today to speak to the throne speech, standing up for Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. As I touched on last night, it's a very aptly named throne speech. Based on one of the opening paragraphs in the throne speech, Mr. Speaker, stating that basically we will stand up for Saskatchewan by working to protect and grow our economy, by carefully managing taxpayers' dollars while delivering important government services and programs to the people of this province. I think that's very important for any government to do, because that's what we're here to do, Mr. Speaker. Part of that is our plan, of course, to return back to balance over a 3-year period. Started a few years back. We'll be returning to balance in this next budget. And the benefits of that is showing there's confidence in our province. We have the AAA credit rating that's continued. Our population continues to grow. We still have interest from the general business sector in investing in Saskatchewan. They look at us favorably, and that's going to continue. So some of our strongest, business opportunities in this province are fairly widespread. Of course, agriculture is our number one driver of our economy, so we're always very responsive and attentive to that, Mr. Speaker. But also, we're working towards strengthening our oil and gas, our mining industries, Mr. Speaker, through different incentives and programs and policies, as well as being fair with everybody in our province when it comes to taxation rates and cost of living, which is why we've done a lot of the tax incentives and tax policies we have over the last number of years, 10 years, Mr. Speaker, that has delivered our 112,000 lowest taxpayers that do not any longer pay provincial income tax in our province. When we look at some of the investments, and we heard about it today, my friend, the member from Estevan, the new highways minister, and the work that she is doing and with highways infrastructure, our other investments in infrastructure throughout the province. We just heard some quite interesting questions, I guess I could say, from the health critic about investments in our infrastructure and healthcare, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Health touched on it very well, not enough time to touch on all the investments, but if we look at those investments, Mr. Speaker, $1.5 billion over the last 10 years. He touched on the Children's Hospital, the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital, which is going to pay huge dividends to the people from all over the province. Saskatchewan Hospital North Battleford, a facility to help our mental health patients and some that have gotten themselves into some criminal activity because of some of their mental health implications, Mr. Speaker. So developing those buildings and those programs within those buildings to serve some of the most needy in our province, Mr. Speaker, is very important to us. And when we look at our school investment, Mr. Speaker, $1.6 billion in our schools over the last number of years, where's the NDP closed schools, Mr. Speaker? 176 schools, I think, if I remember right, the amount of schools that they closed. The Minister of Health touched on the 52 hospitals. He didn't quite have time to touch on the 19 long-term care facilities that they closed, the Plains Health Centre, Mr. Speaker. So we see a pattern developing here. Over 10 years of Saskatchewan Party government, build after build after build, replacing facilities and making sure that we have, to the best of our ability within a balanced budget, investment in infrastructure in the province, whereas we saw under the NDP, closure after closure after closure, Mr. Speaker. And I'll get into maybe before the end of my comments, some of where we know the NDP would go just by history and by some of the comments that they made over the last couple of years. We look at more investments in infrastructure through telecommunications. We know SaskTel's been investing quite mightily throughout the province. I think if you look throughout the country of Canada, our neighbouring provinces, especially those with more rural challenges, I don't know if there's another province that has the telecommunications coverage that we do because of the utilization of our Crown Corporation, specifically SaskTel. So, Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of that. We're very proud of the coverage that I know I have in my home area when it comes to the investment of SaskTel in rural Saskatchewan, which also lends itself to public safety with connectivity from these rural areas, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Highways did touch on the bypass. I want to touch on that briefly, Mr. Speaker. We hear this over and over again about the $400 million ballooning to $2 billion. Well, Mr. Speaker, let's put on record exactly what that project is. Under the NDP, when originally proposed a few miles of repaving, 4 overpasses, $400 million. What we have now is 12 interchanges, Mr. Speaker. We have 40 miles of new 4-lane pavement. We have access roads off to the start, connecting to the new global transportation hub. And of course, they are two very separate projects. The bypass is one project, the GTH is another project. I have full confidence that as we look down into the future, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, we're going to see the GTH paying huge dividends to the people of this province through the export opportunities. I could point to some of the investments under the NDP, Mr. Speaker. Spudco, no more Spudco, Click-a-Bid, gone. Some of these other investments, and I wish our former colleague Yogi Yugaber was here. He had this list down pat that we would just be hammering through the list. But all these things, bingo halls, Mr. Speaker, gone. The GTH is there, and whether in public ownership or eventual private ownership, we know it's going to be paying dividends to the people of this province for many years to come. Of course, the bypass, again, the investment there, an actual $1.2 billion investment, Mr. Speaker, not $2 billion, 1.2. The extra, Mr. Speaker, is money that is going to be spent over the next 30 years to make sure that that infrastructure is kept in like-new condition and returned to the people of the province at that time. So we know through the auditor's own information, it's like $300 and $400 million savings over the period of 30 years. And again, we get a brand new asset like new condition in 30 years. So, Mr. Speaker, I do believe in the long term it's a very good investment. And of course, never to forget the safety implications. I know, Mr. Speaker, I travel that road multiple times per week. I remember the challenge I used to have with traffic coming onto the road, level crossings, level intersections. We heard time and time again the people from those areas coming into this assembly talking about the tragic incidents, accidents, and sometimes loss of life that we would see down that stretch of highway. Mr. Speaker, since the construction started, since the opening of some of the new sections, we haven't seen that happen. I know there's been some accidents, but nothing that has been involving where the former crossings, the intersections were, Mr. Speaker. And of course, a member from Rosemont, time and time again, as the Minister of Highways talked about today, 80 times I think he delivered petitions, and I think a couple of member statements about getting the trucks off of duty. Mr. Speaker, this project, this bypass has done that. It's increased the traffic flow outside of the city to around the city and taking those trucks off of duty. So you'd think the member would be on his feet applauding and not continuing to berate that project, plus all the contractors that have worked on it. I think 80% of the contractors that have worked on that project are Saskatchewan local, Canadian contractors, and we should be very proud of that, the economic development that's happened because of that project. That's been so very important to our province. I know just recently we've saw the announcement, I think it was last week, the member from Martensville celebrated the opening of a couple other interchanges there that is going to help with traffic flow around the north end of Saskatoon, Mr. Speaker. And I could go on and on about the investments in our other major city, Saskatoon, with some of the bridge infrastructure. And Mr. Speaker, let's not forget, whether it's the bypass, these bridges in Saskatoon, this is important infrastructure for the whole province. I drive around Regina, I drive into Saskatoon. I'm from Yorkton, I'm the other side of the province. I enjoy the use of those facilities, those infrastructure facilities, to get me safely around and transported through those major centres, Mr. Speaker. So let's not forget these infrastructure investments in major centres, whether it's hospitals, highways, the schools, serves everybody in the province, Mr. Speaker. When we look at some of the investments that we're making, we talked about in the throne speech about investments in public safety. We know the Provincial Protection and Response Team has already showed dividends. It's really good outcomes with some of those initiatives, integrating our conservation officers, our highway traffic officers with some of our police forces. Very important, Mr. Speaker. And we look at another investment by the Minister of Highways, the 700 million, I believe, or 700,000, sorry, Mr. Speaker, in assessing some of our intersection safety in the province after the tragic incidents that we saw happen around Tisdale only a few short months ago, and doing a study in those intersections to be sure that we have some of the safest level crossings in the province, in the country, Mr. Speaker. We've looked at the changing of the Police Act to enable rural municipalities with populations under 500 to join regional police services. And Mr. Speaker, this only lends itself to increasing our capacity when it comes to public safety, policing opportunities with our municipal partners to give them some options when it comes to providing safety for their citizens. Of course, I really appreciated my friend, the new member from Melfort, his comments about Clare's Law last night, Mr. Speaker, protecting the public again from a different point of view, a different way, by making sure that there's a framework for Saskatchewan Police Services to inform intimate partners about possibility of risk by other partners, Mr. Speaker. I think it's very important that we do keep our citizens as safe as possible, and sharing that information I think is very important. I want to dwell a little bit on healthcare, Mr. Speaker. Again, I don't want to spend too much time, but there's a lot to talk about in healthcare. I'll be as brief as I possibly can. We look at some of the opportunities that we see in the province now in living in rural areas with accessing healthcare. Are we saying we have it perfect? Absolutely not. Has there been a lot of movement and momentum? Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and I'll get to some of those comments in my of course, my remarks. We look at some of the investments we've made in MRI, but also in private MRI delivery that's increased the capacity of our province to the point of doing over 1,400 additional MRIs in our province due to that initiative, Mr. Speaker. And I think we have to explore all those opportunities that do lend itself to strengthening our whole healthcare system. We know moving from from 12 regions, sorry, Mr. Speaker, to one, has shown great improvements throughout the continuum of healthcare. Is there challenges? For sure. But talking to our other jurisdictions across the country that have gone from multiple jurisdictions down to one or fewer regions, we know that we are quite a bit ahead of the curve on that we have addressed a lot of the issues, and we continue to address some of the challenges that do come. But the benefits that we're seeing from going to that one health region has shown, again, very many benefits for the people of the province, which isn't the sole reason we're doing it for financial savings, but we do see initial financial savings, $10 to $20 million. We know as the system rolls out, efficiencies are found, it's going to show even more savings, Mr. Speaker. Something I've worked on quite a bit over the last number of years is working with our EMS providers, providing a more uniform contract system, a more uniform delivery system across the province when it comes to EMS. And we saw, I think, a CBC article just last week about the changes that we're moving ahead with whether it's the closest car responding or whatever the case might be, Mr. Speaker. But improving EMS services with response times is also with the level of expertise that is manning those cars in areas that right now maybe don't have primary care, advanced care paramedics, that we can more fully cover the province with a very top-of-the-line ambulance service throughout throughout the province, Mr. Speaker, including in rural and remote areas. I know one of the members last night was talking about what are we doing when it comes to emergency room waits and all the rest of it, Mr. Speaker. Well, we know the accountable care unit here in Regina, the only one we had in the province, was very successful, so of course we spread that more widely throughout the system. We have 4 that are operating, expanding to another 3, plus the community care model that will be a step down from those accountable care units to provide those services within Regina and Saskatoon, where those accountable care units are, is going to show benefits and get people out of the hospital more quickly, out of acute care, which frees up the system, frees the flow into the hospital where there's an emergent situation in need of acute care, but also gets people out of the hospital into their home setting a lot quicker, which is showing great results when it comes to healing and getting well a little bit quicker, Mr. Speaker. There was, I think, one of our members from Saskatoon talked about individualized funding, Mr. Speaker, today in a member statement, and we're moving down that road as well to increase the opportunities for individualized funding to give people more choice within the public system of accessing the care that they need. I did talk briefly about the Jim Pattison Children's Hospital. We know that project now is 92% complete. I think the staffing number is about 80–90% staff, so we know we're very well positioned when that facility opens late next fall. And again, just from personal experience, having sick children, acutely sick children, the benefits that's going to pay to the people of this province is going to be something that is very close to my heart, but I'm very proud of what that facility is going to mean to the people of our province and our children. When it comes to some of our mental health issues and some of our responses to some of those issues when it comes to addictions, Mr. Speaker, we know some of the investments that we've seen through PAC teams, police crisis action teams, where you have a police officer coupled with a mental health worker responding to some of these situations, has shown a lot of benefits. So of course we're expanding that program throughout the province as well. One of those is in my hometown of Yorkton. Also Prince Albert, North Battleford, and Moose Jaw are going to see those crisis teams integrated into action here fairly soon. Some of the information, some of the conversations I had with our children's advocate when it came to integrating and having mental health supports within our education system. Of course, we know we announced that pilot program a little while ago, and those communities of North Battleford, Sandy Bay, Regina, and Balgonie have been chosen for the rollout of that program, and we're looking forward to seeing the impact that will have in the coming months and years in our education system when it comes to mental health supports for our children. When it comes to some of the addictions issues, Mr. Speaker, we know that the opioid crisis has been a tragic happening across our country. We're no different. We've suffered some of the effects of the opioid crisis. So that's why we chose to expand the take-home naloxone kit to not only our medical providers, but also to private family members that might be more suited to quickly respond to some of those that may be experiencing an overdose. And also we know, not that it's directly connected to addictions, but we know the high incidence of HIV in the province is something that we have to address. And that's why we decided to do universal coverage for our HIV medications to more quickly and more fully respond to some of our most vulnerable in the province, Mr. Speaker. Individualized funding for our autistic children in the province, that's been rolled out, and so we'll have $4,000 annually going to children under 6, and then as the years progress, we look at expanding that program as well. One of the final things I'm going to talk about in healthcare is something that's again really close to my heart is remote presence technology. We've seen the effects this has had. Its initial trial with nurse robots in Pelican Narrows, expanding out throughout the province, expanding to what some would call doc in a box, some would call nurse in a purse, others would call health in your hands, but that remote presence technology able to go right to the patient and be utilized in a very effective manner is just showing amazing outcomes when it comes to rural and remote healthcare opportunities and connecting people with healthcare professionals, including specialists, and from time to time mental health supports, Mr. Speaker, is very important. So we applaud the work of Dr. Ivor Mendez and the work he continues to do, even going so far as to expand that into Stony Rapids and starting to integrate ultrasound technology into that remote presence technology, Mr. Speaker. So before I wind up my remarks, I think I've probably gone on enough. Some of my other colleagues will talk about some of these other areas that we're touching on in the throne speech, Mr. Speaker. But, you know, we always have to remember that we hear all this stuff in this building, and it maybe isn't always the right perspective. So we'll hear criticisms across the floor, and that's their job, is to criticize. But Mr. Speaker, as a good friend that I mentioned earlier, Yogi Hugabear, God rest his soul, he's a great colleague, good friend, mentor, and I would say a hero, Mr. Speaker, a military veteran that we remember, especially this time of the year. He used to tell us something about not getting too wrapped up in this place, and he called it domeitis, because you think you see what's happening in the media and what's being barked across the floor. That's not really always the whole fact. And that really, what really opened up my eyes to that fact was I was at a rural revitalization conference here just a few short weeks ago in Saskatoon. And one of the opening speakers, a First Nations individual, I can't remember his name or where he's from, but he had just come back from a conference in Australia when it came to rural and remote health care. And I was quite floored. I know we're doing a lot in the province. Some of the things we're doing haven't seen the successes that we're expecting to see in the future, but they're underway. You don't really realize people are recognizing what's happening in our country, specifically in this province. Through the hard work of our medical professionals, the Ministry of Health, the Saskatchewan Health Authority, my colleague and I, we try and help a little bit from time to time. But what that individual the story he told us was the conversations at this conference in Australia, Canada, specifically Saskatchewan, being recognized not only for what we're accomplishing, but the direction we're going. Remote presence technology, how we compensate our healthcare professionals, training healthcare professionals in rural settings, having a higher instance of our recruitment and retention in some of the rural and remote areas. Have we arrived yet? Absolutely not. We have a lot more distance to go, and I realize that. But it's very encouraging for me and all those others involved throughout the healthcare continuum, specifically our frontline providers, when they hear stories like that you are doing a heck of a good job. Don't stop. Keep plugging towards that final goal of having the best place in Canada, maybe the best place in the world is what we're shooting for those that in need of medical assistance in rural and remote areas, Mr. Speaker. So that was quite encouraging for me to hear. And not to criticize the members opposite too much, the NDP like to come across as the saviors of rural everything, rural healthcare. And we heard early in the comments of my colleague from Rosetown, the Minister of Health, about the decimation of healthcare in this province over the last 16 years of the NDP government. The one thing that really baffled me, and not too long ago, when the member from Rosemount, I think he was the leader of the time, doing some healthcare criticism, and he was criticizing our panel report on health system rejuvenation, restructuring, going down to one health region. And I remember the comment he said, maybe I won't be quoting it specifically, I'd have to look back and answer, but he commented that, why are you wasting your time and your money on this? Why didn't you just dust off the report that was done under the NDP, the Fight Commission report? Well, Mr. Speaker, you know what the Fight Commission report would have said? Never mind the 52 that they closed, they would have asked for 50 or 70 more closures in this province, further decimating healthcare. And Mr. Speaker, that's not anywhere that we want to go. We're here to strengthen healthcare, I think, especially in rural and remote areas. I think our record speaks to that. We've been building facilities, training double the doctors. We're retaining, I think previously we had 60 spots. We were retaining about 50-some%, 57%. We've got 100 medical seats now, some of those again in rural areas. We're retaining 75% of those through the hard work of PRAS and SAS Docs and the college and all the others involved in training of doctors. The message is getting out that rural practice, family practice in a rural setting is a great career choice. We're having a lot of success. So for that reason, we're having less and less international grads that we're having to recruit into the system. We're always going to need our international physicians. They're a great asset to the system. But we're having less and less need of that because we're retaining and training more right in our province. So, Mr. Speaker, it's another bit of great news that I'm really encouraged by. And of course, the Minister of Health and I support all this work. We're a very small part of this team. We really applaud all those, again, the Health Authority, the Ministry, and all those involved in delivering health care in this province for the hard work that they do, and we do very much appreciate them every day. So, Mr. Speaker, so much I could talk about in education, the investments we've made. We've got the curriculum renewal coming up that we're looking at more financial literacy and the sciences and technology and engineering to better prepare our students for a future in this province. And, Mr. Speaker, I'm just so very happy with our Premier's stance, a fight that he started quite a while ago as Environment Minister against the carbon tax in favor of pipelines to strengthen our economy, but also to forward an honest plan on environmental sustainability through our Prairie Resilience Plan, Mr. Speaker. The work that's being carried on by our friend, the minister from Weyburn, the Environment Minister, the great work that he's doing as well, Mr. Speaker. So as I close my comments, I just have to say that I am not going to support the amendment. I'm fully going to support the main motion and support this throne speech read by the Lieutenant Governor from our Premier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.